637 Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Welcome on in to your Wednesday, January 15th. Hope you're doing well. What an incredible performance from Pete Hegseth. Even CNN is saying that he seems to be on the glide path to confirmation. Incredible job from Pete Hegseth yesterday.
The Department of Defense under Donald Trump will achieve peace through strength. And in pursuing these America First national security goals will remain patriotically apolitical and stridently constitutional. Unlike the current administration, politics should play no part in military matters. We are not Republicans. We are not Democrats. We are American warriors.
And Matthew Hurtt, I know, is one of millions of conservatives that no doubt was watching or have now watched the confirmation hearings of Pete Hegseth. And Matthew, I thought he did a really good job. And to be perfectly candid, I thought that the Democrats and, particularly the women, they looked like they were attacking. And I think that was their plan because he's got this reputation as a womanizer for good reason. But I think that was their plan. Let's get Elizabeth Warren and Tammy Duckworth and Crazy Hirono to attack Pete Hegseth.
Well, Dan, this is absolutely right. Pete did a pretty good job. This is one of the most contentious confirmation hearings that I've seen, and you and I have talked about some of these details as we've led up to this week. The Republicans have a 14 to 13 seat breakdown on this committee. So it's very likely that he'll move through to the floor of the U.S. Senate. But I don't believe, given the questions and the juxtaposition with the Democratic senators yesterday, that Pete is going to pick up a single Democrat vote from this committee. But he did. He handled these questions. He knew they were coming, and showed some grace there, and definitely channeled, the things that we as conservatives believe, forgiveness and giving someone a second chance. I thought he did a pretty good job.
Let me ask you this. Do you believe, today we've got Pam Bondi, we've got Marco Rubio, Secretary of State and AG, respectively. And so do you believe that any Democrats will vote for Pam Bondi? I think Rubio could pick up some votes from the Democrats. At this point, we are so divided, Democrats and Republicans, that outside of John Fetterman, I don't know of anybody who would vote for a Donald Trump nominee.
Well, Elon Musk has signaled that he would fund and support primary challengers to Republicans. I think you're looking at the same thing on the Democratic side. If you've got a Democrat U.S. Senator in any state, they're going to pick up a further left primary opponent for supporting a Donald Trump nominee this go-round. And I think this is what we're looking at, the hyper-partisan nature of these hearings, certainly, but then of the electorate in that regard. The ranking member of the committee that Pete Hegseth was before yesterday said that the Democrat said that he had voted for all 9 previous Secretary of Defense nominees and was not inclined to vote for Pete Hegseth. And I think that's what we're seeing, Dan. We're seeing the partisan fight in the Senate, and that any one of these Democrats who votes for a Trump nominee, even somebody like Tulsi Gabbard, who was a Democrat in the past, they're going to pick up a further left primary challenger.
It's amazing. So I was talking about this before we went to the last break. Biden has now, this was breaking news this morning, he has put out this letter, headline, President Biden releases farewell letter, says it's been the privilege of his life to serve this nation. I think the American people definitely don't feel privileged that he was the president for 4 years. But what's interesting is that in this letter, he says things that are just demonstrably untrue. He says that, they came up with 26 million jobs and how we are safer and more secure as a nation than we were 4 years ago. He's talking about how when he ran for president, he believed that the soul of the nation was at stake. Remember all of that BS that is literally based on a lie. And he says that the same thing is true now. I mean, honestly, who the hell is he trying to kid here?
Well, Joe Biden is trying to establish a legacy. We've seen headlines over the last few weeks of President Biden engaging with reporters and historians, attempting to solidify his legacy. And what we're going to learn and what the American people, I think, will reflect on looking back at a Joe Biden presidency is that this was a gentleman who, in the sunset years of his life, wanted to serve one last time and failed miserably. There are no redeeming aspects of this presidential administration, regardless of how hard they tried to spin the post-pandemic, economic boom, which we saw constantly revised downward every month in the jobs report, inflation at an all-time high. And this is, he's attempting to drive a narrative, and it's just not going to connect with the American people.
It's interesting, though, because the Democrats are still playing this game, even though they themselves have now admitted that Biden was a train wreck. I think that for the Democrat Party, I think it's going to take them a long time to recover. Coming up, because I got to check the traffic, but coming up, I'm going to ask you this question. No doubt you see what's going on in California. So we have clear examples of the threat of progressive rule. We know what's happened with Joe Biden. We now know what's happened in California with the fires and all of the things that they could have done to mitigate the threat of fire, but they didn't do because they were listening to the screaming, insane environmentalists that are out there in California. And so what I'm going to ask you coming up is, number one, do you actually see a point in time where California could actually end up going back to red and the people of California will vote Republican? Because there are clear examples that their rule actually harms the people of that state. So I'm going to ask you that coming up. It is 6:45, time to check the roads on WTN. At 6:45, weather today, a high of 39. Right now, 20 degrees. Super Talk 99.7. WTN going to be sunny as well. All right, Matthew Hurtt. We know that, no pun intended, progressive policies hurt the states that they're in. I mean, New York, California, and we can just go down to Chicago. I mean, it's an easy putt. But in California specifically, you actually have actors and showbiz people calling out Karen Bass, calling out Gavin Newsom. Do you think that this will have an impact on Congress, local state assemblies, and the governor's office there in the state of California?
We saw in the 2024 election wild swings to the right in Los Angeles, across California, really in every county across the country. We saw significant swings to the right at the top of the ticket. So more people shifted to vote for Donald Trump in 2024 than they did in 2020. And I think what we're going to see is a continuation of that. Now, California has the most number of Republican votes statewide than any state. And I think we're going to see an increase. There was a really great conversation with Edward Ring at the California Policy Center. Water, sewer, and infrastructure are not really sexy public policy topics, but he really dug in a 3-hour conversation with Joe Rogan earlier this week about what is happening in California, the actual policy failures, line by line. Yep. And they were all created by progressive Democrats who have been elected for decades in Los Angeles and in California. And I think more people are going to realize that, and they're going to have this, they're going to have to struggle in their minds with what they believe is their set of principles or values, progressive or far left, and the actual application of those policies when it comes to these issues that usually don't make the headlines every day. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's interesting because Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, he has been saying that for the Trump administration, the question is, all right, so do you put conditions on the federal aid that Joe Biden has promised? And I think that it's an intriguing and interesting idea because we're giving billions of dollars to California so they can continue on with the same policies and the same people that destroyed the state.
Well, what sometimes happens when Democrats run the show is they'll put conditions that involve environmental protections and different layers of left-wing bureaucracy. I think that dragging that question into Congress and into the Senate makes it difficult to make disaster declarations in other places like Florida, a red state now. But there are certainly some questions. Why are you implementing failed left-wing policies, and why would you use federal government money to do it? And I think that is a serious question that needs to be asked and answered, knowing that the people who ensure the water infrastructure is there and ensure that these protections are in place do not care if you're a Republican or Democrat. You know, if your house is on fire, the fire department doesn't usually ask, are you a Republican or a Democrat?
Tell me about, and we've only got like a minute left, but tell me what is going on in Washington, D.C., Virginia right now. Is there a lot of excitement for the inauguration of Donald Trump?
There is a lot of excitement. The Republican National Committee meets for their spring meeting starting today. We will have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people from across the country. It's going to be a great weekend, a lot of time to celebrate and a lot of time to hit the ground running and ensure the Trump agenda makes it through Congress.
Do you think Gavin Newsom's done? Do you think, you know, a lot of people that I'm saying that his political career has got to be over. And I think one of the reasons why Donald Trump is focusing so much on Newsom, number one, is because his policies are terrible. But number two is because Trump understands that within the Democrat Party, Newsom perhaps maybe is still a big deal. And so Trump is utilizing the fire as a way to attack Gavin Newsom to damage him politically. It also is a fact that his handling of all of this has been terrible, so he does deserve a negative spotlight on him.
I would be surprised if Newsom were able to make it through a Democratic primary in his home state for president, and I think that there's not much left to the Newsom runway in national politics.
All right, Matthew Hurtt, how can people follow you on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter at Matthew Hurtt, MattheWHurtt.
All right, thank you very much. We'll catch you on X, and always appreciate having you on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. By the way, coming up at 7:06, it is Wednesdays with Wilson. Brian Wilson is going to join us. You know that he is headed to Washington, D.C. to cover the inauguration. So we're going to catch up with Brian and find out how those plans are going. That is going to be incredible. Listen, friends, if you have a piece of land that you don't know what to do with, maybe some property, think about a pole barn from my friends at Stoltzco. They are the premier pole barn builders here in the state of Tennessee. You know, putting up a pole barn from Stoltzco, it could actually increase the value of your land. You can use your new pole barn as a garage, an event space, an equestrian building. You can even live in it. We call those barn dominiums. Here's the deal. Pole barns from Stoltzco, they are flexible, they're built really well, and they will stand the test of time. You could also plan ahead and build your next retirement home. So call Stoltzco, tell them Dan Mandis told you to reach out, 615-622-5992, 615-622-5992. This is a great Tennessee company. You can also find them on Instagram and Facebook as well. Their website, Stoltzco, Stoltzco.com. That is Stoltzco.com, 615-622-5992 for Stoltzco. 6:51 on Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. There it is. Joan Jones is in the dust-encrusted news corner with the latest coming up at 7. Joan, what's coming up?
Police are on the scene this morning of a shooting in Antioch and why a middle school teacher was busted in front of her students. That's coming up at 7 o'clock on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.